Okay, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming tonight for our webinar on Street Law Resources for Law Day and Every Day, teaching the cornerstones of democracy. We're really happy to have you here tonight. Thanks for coming after a long day of teaching, and we really appreciate you being here with us. This is our agenda for tonight. I am going to just say a couple, a very few brief words of welcome, and then we're going to be joined by the president of the American Bar Association, Deborah Enix-Ross, who is going to tell us about Law Day, a little bit about the history and why we should care and celebrate Law Day, and then particularly about the 2023 theme, Cornerstones of Democracy. I'm then going to run you through a bunch of street law resources that really align well with this year's theme, so that if you want to use any of them to help celebrate Law Day or to scaffold your learning for a culminating project that you do on Law Day or any day, you can use those resources. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A in case you have a question about anything we talked about tonight. And lastly, we'll just talk about how you can stay in touch with street law so that you can find out about our resources as they become available. So my brief words of welcome will just be that, first of all, we are very happy to have you tonight. If you can make sure, this isn't a meeting format, so if you can make sure that you are muted when you are not speaking, that would be really helpful. And we might have to help you out on that if you aren't doing that. And I just wanted to say that the reason this webinar came about was because we at Street Law are really big fans of the American Bar Association and everything that they stand for. They work so tirelessly for the rule of law and to make sure that civic education and law-related education is thriving. So we follow the ABA very closely. And we're big fans of Law Day as a day or a week or a month every year when you can really celebrate law and the rule of law. And so we're always excited about Law Day, but when the ABA unveiled during Civic Awareness Week their 2023 theme, Cornerstones of Democracy, Civics, Civility, and Collaboration, we were just besides ourselves because we have been working really hard in all of those areas and feel like it's such a great moment of synergy that that everything's coming together. And they're obviously an important call to action right now to the legal profession and teachers alike. So without further ado, I want to introduce our special guest tonight, the president of the Bar Association, President Deborah Enix-Ross. She has a very, very impressive and very full biography. So I urge you to scan that QR code at the bottom that will take you to the ABA website where you can read all of her amazing accomplishments. But I'm just going to highlight a few that I think are particularly important for what we're talking about tonight. And that is she is the senior advisor to the International Dispute Resolution Group of Debevoise and Plimpton in New York City. She co-founded the Women's Interest Network and helped to create the ABA's Women's Interest Group. And she served as vice president of the World Justice Project. So I'm going to turn it over to President Enix-Ross and ask her to say a little bit more about herself and her involvement with the ABA before we jump into Law Day specific discussions.
Well, thank you so much for that really kind and generous introduction. I feel like there's not much more to say, except that I will say this. I am really pleased and proud to be here and to be a part of this conversation. And my interest in the law really developed thanks to a field trip that I took when I was in the 6th grade. So when teachers think, does this really make a difference? I'm here to tell you it makes a difference. I was in New York City public school student, and we went on a visit to the courts in New York City. And I saw this man sitting on high in a black robe who seemed to be very wise and all-knowing and just. And I said to my teacher, "Who is that?" And my teacher said, "That is a judge." And I said, "How do you become a judge?" And she said, "You need to go to law school. You have to become a lawyer." And so I think the seed was planted there. So thank you to all the teachers for the way that you inspire all of us students. And you never know what one moment will do and how it will have an impact.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next we're going to ask Deborah just to tell us a little bit about Law Day. Some of you are probably very familiar with Law Day, maybe even celebrated in your classrooms, but maybe this is the first time you're hearing about it. So talk to us like we're fifth graders, President Enix-Ross.
Or maybe sixth graders like I was when I went to the courts. So, right, Law Day. So first of all, the first thing to say is although Law Day is a designated day, which is May 1st, you can celebrate, and we encourage you to celebrate Law Day throughout the month of May. But it came about because of President Dwight Eisenhower. So we've been celebrating Law Day since 1958, which means that this year it will be our 65th anniversary, and it was designed to celebrate the rule of law. And I know the history teachers among you will remember that Eisenhower was a former 5-star Army general during World War II. So he saw firsthand what happens when the rule of law breaks down. And so in contrast to the Soviet Union's military parade on May Day, we established the Rule of Law Day, and that's how Law Day became into existence. So 65 years later, we still take a moment to celebrate as Americans, what is the rule of law? What does it mean? Why is it so important to us? And what can we do to continue to make sure that we are upholding the rule of law?
Great, so that brings us to this year. And I'm sure you had many themes to choose from, and there were probably lots of meetings and discussions and, all that kind of stuff. How did you end up with the theme, or how did you settle on the themes, Cornerstones of Democracy, Civics, Civility, and Collaboration? And why do you think that's so important in the times that we live in?
So I have to say, you must have been sitting in the room in the meetings where it feels like you were right there. But yes, there are many themes that we could select, but I have chosen Cornerstones of Democracy, the 3 C's, Civics, Civility, and Collaboration, as an area of focus during my presidency. And ABA presidents have a 1-year term. It runs August to August. So as I began to think about what I wanted to focus on in the ABA in the year that I was the president, those 3 C's really resonated with me, because we really need to stress civics education and also civic engagement, so that our citizens are educated and understand how the government is meant to work, what the 3 branches are at the federal level, how they interact, how our federal and state governments interact. So the whole idea of civics and civic engagement. Civility, because we certainly are at a moment in our society where it's really important for us, especially as lawyers, as leaders, to demonstrate what civility looks like. And civility is not passivity. It doesn't mean that you're not passionate about your views, but it is finding productive ways of expressing them. And then for me, the 3rd C is probably in some ways the most important. It's the collaboration. And that means that although lawyers can certainly lead, and in the ABA, we certainly think of ourselves as leaders in the legal profession, We can lead on the rule of law, but it is not exclusively our purview. We need to collaborate with so many, including teachers and business leaders and faith leaders and academicians, everyone, because collectively that is how we are going to make sure that we are promoting and securing our democracy.
Great. So I just want to give some warning that I'm going to open up the field for questions in a second, but I did want to plant my own question here since you finished on the concept of collaboration, and that is, and specifically collaborating between teachers and the legal field. So I wanted you to address the question of why and how should teachers ask legal professionals into their classrooms. So first, why should they do it? What's the benefit of doing it? And then if they're sold and they want to do it, how did they go about doing it?
Yeah, so I think the benefit is that lawyers can uniquely describe our democratic process, our institutions, whether it's our courts or whether it's how to vote and what that civic engagement looks like. And I dare say that literally across this country, in every area, there are bar associations that are ready to help you develop curriculum and activities that are specific for age groups, for your community. So this is not one size fits all. It is really thinking about and working with you to provide the kind of content that makes sense for your communities. And we know that this is the case because a number of bar associations have taken up the idea of the 3 C's. We have the materials on our ABA website, the Cornerstones website, and it can be tailored to topics. It can be tailored to age appropriate content, any way that you need. And you don't have to do the work. We will come in. There are many states that have judges that come into classrooms and promote civics and civility. I was in Louisiana and they have a fabulous program there, but there are many other states that do as well. So think of us as that resource to bring learning alive in your classrooms.
Great, thank you. Any questions for President Enix-Ross before she goes? Okay, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all that you do through the ABA.
Well, it's my pleasure. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to me through the ABA website, ABA President, and the Cornerstones of Democracy website is there. It has tons of resources and information. We're here to help you in any way we can. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. And thank you for what you do as teachers. I think sometimes it can feel thankless, but please know that what you do is invaluable. It made an impression on a 6th grader who ended up becoming president of the American Bar Association. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I would like to go on to talk about the street law resources that we have that really help to underscore the things that President Enix-Ross was speaking about. And this is a list of just some of our resources, and I'm going to go through them one by one, and I'll sort of tell you how I think they connect, and we can talk about what they are. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. There's a Q&A at the end, but please feel free to break in at any point. There's a QR code there and a bit.ly, and Ben, maybe you can drop the bit.ly that will take you to a sheet that has the links to all of these, so you don't have to try to remember where to find them or what the URLs are. So the first thing that came to mind when I saw civics collaboration or civic civility and collaboration were our deliberations. So so a deliberation, you can see the definition we use there is when students collaborate or cooperatively discuss contested political issues by carefully considering multiple perspectives and reaching for consensus. So there's lots going on in that definition. Students are not debating, they're not trying to best each other, they're having cooperative discussions, and they're looking at issues that are contested issues. That's really important for us. So when we pick our topics, we pick topics that have valid arguments on both sides. And then they look at both sides of the argument. They read a common reading that has everyone on the same page, that gives some background and then outlines the arguments, the pros and cons of the issue. And then they have discussions in which they take different sides and that they search for consensus. So finding consensus isn't a requirement because it might be impossible with many of these topics. So the whole concept of deliberations really fits in well with the Law Day theme because it's civil conversation. It gets to that civility, and it's also collaboration. You're collaboratively trying to come up with what your thoughts are on this issue and then looking to see if there's any consensus. So we have many, many, many deliberations written. Most are written at a high school level. There are several written at a middle school level, and I believe we now have one written at an upper elementary school level. But these are just a smattering of the issues that I thought also really hit the civics in the 3 C's. And as well as the civil conversation, the civility, and the collaboration. So students are posed with this question. Like I said, they have a common reading, and then they're asked to take an initial position. So if they're sitting in groups of 4, which is usually the way it's done, 2 students would answer the question in the affirmative. So let's say, should violent juvenile offenders be punished as adults? 2 students would say, yes, they should. 2 students would say, no, they shouldn't. They would read the reading, look for the most valid arguments, what they think are the most compelling arguments. And then they just listen to each other, explain why they felt those were the most compelling arguments, not debating with each other, not arguing with each other's. And then they would switch sides. And that's really the special sauce. So I've answered in the affirmative. Now I look at the other side. And the very first thing that side does is give back to the first side the argument that they thought was most compelling, that they heard the other side say. So if there's a listening, that's a listening skill that's developed, because to be able to do that, you have to really listen when the other side is telling you what they think the most important points are. And then you tell them back, this is the point that I thought was the most valid, and then add your own point. And then not only after both sides have thought about the affirmative and the negative, is there an open discussion where the groups bring in their own lived experiences, their own thoughts, and they have a small group discussion about the issue. And then there's a larger group debriefing discussion. So this is a very structured protocol. The reason I took the time to explain it to you is it's a very structured protocol. And the arguments that we've written are vetted with experts on both sides of the issue. So I know it can be a scary time in some classrooms and some settings across the United States to talk about current contested issues, but the fact that this is that both sides are represented and that it is a very structured protocol should help to alleviate some of that nervousness about having these discussions. Research has told us recently that teachers more than ever are saying it's important for students to develop the skills to talk about current and contested issues, but they're also at the very same time saying that they are less willing to take the risk to do that in their classrooms. So this should hopefully bridge that gap between, feeling like it's an important topic that we should cover and understand, and then feeling like there's a protocol in place that makes it a safe thing to do in your classroom. There are many other topics, as I said before. Some are cross-curricular, like there's one about should our community allow fracking. There's one about should our community raise the minimum wage, that makes students do some economics and some mathematics. So there's lots of topics to check out. The next thing that came to mind when I saw the theme of Cornerstones of Democracy and ABA in general, their focus on the rule of law, is we have a new rule of law curriculum. And one of the things I love about this curriculum is that it is really flexible. So it can be used in middle school and high school classes. Because the way it's structured is that there are base lessons, and you can see the 8 base lessons there, an introduction and a culminating activity, and then a lesson for each of the factors of the rule of law. But then there are also extensions, which helps teachers bring them into different types of classrooms and different levels. So we'll take a look at what I mean by extensions in a second. But this is a very flexible curriculum. It's very new. The rule of law in the United States, this curriculum. So street law has been teaching about rule of law around the world for a very long time, but it's only recently through a generous grant from the Annenberg Foundation that we were able to bring this to for US classrooms. So I wanted to share with you the introduction lesson, the introduction to the rule of law, because a lot of us have it in our standards, but it's sort of something that you teach about when you teach about the founding and don't spend a lot of time on. But there are so many factors that come up in elsewhere in our standards, like the court system and fundamental rights and limited government. So those things are all part of the factors of the rule of law. And this lesson really gets students to think about how do those 6 factors fit together. And it uses a method that is not particularly new, but I think is getting a lot of attention right now, called hexagonal thinking, that allows students to think about how concepts that they're learning fit together and to make connections for themselves. And we all know that when students make connections for themselves, they're much more likely to retain that information. So you'll see 2 different examples here. I actually did both of these examples in different times, and you can see that even I came up with different ways that these things connected. The one is if you're going to do the paper or pen version in your classroom, in your face-to-face classroom, you can cut out the hexagons and allow students time to think about how all of these things are put together after they do a short reading. And for the other one, it was done on a Jamboard. The extensions I mentioned make it really flexible, so that for each of these base lessons, there's a lesson extension, one for foundational documents, one for history, one for current events, and one for international classes, like if you taught a comparative government class. So you can see this is the base lesson for the fair and effective court system, but then you could take it in different, you could take it down different avenues based on the extension that you choose, or you might choose to not even do an extension, or alternately, you might just do the extension. So if I came here and I thought, I don't want to do the base lesson, but I do need to teach about the 6th Amendment, that's in my standards. So then you could just do the lesson on the 6th Amendment. When I think about Law Day and celebrating Law Day, I actually think about mock trials and moot courts, because when I was in the classroom, I taught government and law, and that's how I celebrated Law Day. So I did want to mention that we have fairly recently in 2021 updated what used to be an actual physical workbook that you had to pay for, now as a free to download, 2 free to download resources. So first I'll talk about the Classroom Guide to Mock Trials. And this is a guide that you can use two ways. You can either use the many lessons that you see here to sort of scaffold a really detailed mock trial and make sure your students know all of the pieces, including objections or the rules of evidence, or you can just jump into the mock trial and sort of do it without a lot of pre-preparation and just not expect maybe the same level of knowing all of the rules of evidence and things. So this is free to download. You could get your students up and running on a mock trial fairly quickly. And it comes within this mock trial, all of the lessons use the example of the practice trial, the People v. Taylor. It's a very simple trial, and it helps them to build their skills by using the same practice mock trial over and over. But then we do have larger mock trials, and you can kind of choose your own adventure in the level of difficulty. So at the end of the mock trial resource, you can choose, we have 2 simple mock trials, 2 moderate mock trials, and 2 challenging mock trials that were actually developed by the Georgetown Street Law Program. So they are very high level mock trials. You can kind of look at them, see what topic might interest your students and the level of difficulty that might be appropriate for your students. There's a sort of companion document that is about moot court. So mock trials, I think most people know what those are. That is a simulation of an actual trial court where you have witnesses and lawyers and a judge, and you make objections, and a jury. But a moot court is a simulation of an appellate court, so most often the Supreme Court. And so this guide will get your students ready to do a moot court of a Supreme Court case, either a historic case or a contemporary case. And again, there's lots of lessons you can use to scaffold those skills, or you can kind of jump into the moot court and do it without a whole lot of scaffolding, especially depending on the level of your students. We also have a lesson called mini moot courts, where if you don't want to have sort of the pageantry of 9 justices in the front of the room and people standing up in front of the whole class, if you're worried maybe about students not having an active role, you can do what we call mini moot courts, which is when they meet in smaller groups, either triads or sometimes 6 students in a group, and they have they have 1 justice or 2 justices, and they argue the case just like they would in front of a big audience, but it's a little more intimate. There's no place to hide as far as participation. Everyone has to participate, and it doesn't put students maybe on the spot as much as a full moot court. You can moot almost any case, so we suggest strongly that you think about the position you'd be putting your students in if you ask them to moot some landmark cases that are about social issues. Like, you obviously would not want to moot Dred Scott, or something where you had to have a student stand up and argue against the humanity of another person. But these are cases that we recommend and that have been recently revised that would be really great to moot. And as also, we have hundreds and hundreds of Supreme Court case summaries in our free resource library, which I'll talk about momentarily, that you could use, as long as you use some discretion about which ones you use. This is a moot court that some teachers in our Supreme Court Summer Institute were doing at Georgetown University Law Center, but that's essentially what a moot court looks like. And we also have cases from contemporary cases that are being argued before the court this term. So these are the most classroom relevant, student friendly cases that we can find. So every term we're looking for the cases that we think teachers might teach because the subject matter is something that they would be covering, or it's something that students are very interested in. We encourage teachers to hold moot courts before the court hands down their decision. So there is no right answer, so that students can't say this is how the court found, so it's how the answer should be. They can take a look at it before there is a decision. And it gives students, again, a really structured way to talk about some of the most controversial and contested issues of our day. And in a way that has them looking at the legal arguments of both sides that were presented in briefs to the court. So right now we have available, and this I took this screenshot yesterday. So actually, as of today, we have Groff v. DeJoy available as well. We have lots of cases from the most recent terms, but from this term, these are the cases that we have. We have the 2 Students for Fair Admissions cases, one v. Harvard and one v. UNC. So those are the affirmative action in college admissions cases. We have 303 Creative v. Elenis, although we're actually not suggesting that teachers moot this case. This is the case about the web designer that doesn't want to provide websites for same-sex weddings. So we're actually not suggesting that that one be mooted, but we have some, we put some suggestions for other activities that you might do with that case if you want to study it but not moot it. Argued tomorrow will be Counterman v. Colorado. That is a case about true threats on the internet. And argued today in the court is Groff v. DeJoy, and that is a case about a postal worker who is refusing to deliver mail on Sunday, packages for Amazon on Sunday. And his case started out as a lawsuit against the United States Postal Service. So it's about how much religious accommodation the government and organizations and companies have to provide for their employees. So you can see that a lot of these cases are things that are the kids care about, things about religious practice, things about the internet and what I can say on the internet, questions about law, about college admissions. Another resource that we have that really gets at the cornerstones of democracy is legal timelines. So this is a new website that we were able to make through a grant from the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources project. And this is a website that is an interactive timeline that will let students explore how concepts like federalism and voting and rights of the accused have evolved over time in the United States. So students can use the interactive timeline to be able to navigate issues like in federalism, you know, the Commerce Clause. How has the Commerce Clause been interpreted over time? In things like safeguards of justice, juvenile justice, how has that changed over time? Or the idea of having to give someone Miranda rights. You know, when do you have to be told that you have a right to remain silent and a right to have an attorney? So they can navigate through the timeline itself. And then for each of these timelines, there are 5 or 6 inquiry-based primary source packets that allow students to take really deep dives into different topics. So for instance, in suffrage, there is an inquiry pack that talks about, do you have an explicit right to vote? Does that exist in the Constitution? And there are lots of different documents, both visual and text-based, that allow students to come up with their own conclusions about those things. So if we have time at the end, I'll pull up the website. very similar to this, but if instead of taking a topical approach, you wanted to look at specific court cases, we developed with another grant from the Library of Congress Teaching with Primary Sources project, Supreme Court case packs that are also about primary sources and inquiry. And if you happen to be from Maryland, you'll recognize that list of middle school cases as the cases required in the state of Maryland, because we did that project in conjunction with the Maryland Department of Education. And so these are great for if you want to have your students really take a deep dive into a particular case and how maybe it changed our cornerstones of democracy. And you can see that these cases are about things that come up in civics courses, like voting, like the rights of the accused, like federalism. And the last resource that I wanted to share is landmark cases. So we have been in partnership with the Supreme Court Historical Society for a very long time to co-host this website, Landmark Cases, but it got new content not too long ago in 2021. And then now just recently, as in just about a week and a half or 2 weeks ago, it got a brand new look. And so this website is maybe something that you've used before, but it looks a lot different now. It's a lot more user-friendly and is worth a second look if you haven't looked lately. One of the changes that we made in 2021 was a result of the pandemic, to be honest, because with this used to be really a teacher-facing page, a page where we expected teachers to go to get the resources that they would then hand out in class and use in class. But after the pandemic began, we realized with all of the remote teaching that it was really going to be important for teachers to be able to just send their students to this website and not have to be the intermediary to either take that information and put it on their learning management system or send it through the mail. So we made this website student and teacher facing. We also really beefed up the glossary, which is really easy to use now and a really good place to go, maybe even if you're not studying those specific cases, but you just want to know you want your students to know some legal terminology. And we added 3 new cases, which has brought us up to 20 cases. And this is going to be really small. I don't know if you can really see this in much detail, but these are the 20 cases that we have. As far as our research could tell, these are the cases that teachers taught most about and wanted the most resources about. So it doesn't align completely with the 15 required cases for the AP Government and Politics exam, because we came up with our list before they came up with their list. That's a fairly recent development from College Board, but there is a lot of overlap if you look at this list. The 3 new cases that we added recently were Engel v. Vitale, Schenck versus US, and Obergefell v. Hodges. And that came from some polling we did with teachers to see what they wanted to teach about. Okay. I'm going to try to pull up. I'm a little nervous because I had some issues, but here is, since we have time, here is the legal timelines. So this is what it looks like when you pull it up. It is an interactive timeline, so you can navigate the timeline in a couple different ways. You can use the cursor to have students look through. So this is the suffrage one. So what is happening in with the suffrage movement in general. And there are things you can see. There are documents, there are videos, all sorts of things pop up. You can also use the timeline below to click on different events that will take you to whatever you want to go to. And you can pull this along if you want to go really far in time. You know, I want to see like some of the most recent issues. You know, I'm going to come to a case that was just decided in 2021 about racial disparity and about the Voting Rights Act. Down below the actual timeline is where you'll find the learning activities. And so here is the one of the inquiry packs that I was speaking about. It starts with an inquiry question: should the Constitution be amended to guarantee an explicit right to vote? And then there are several different documents. There's always a background that gives students some context so they know what they're looking at. This one has a bunch of quotes from founders about whether or not there should be an explicit right to vote. It has a cover of Harper's Weekly. It has a political cartoon that comes up in a lot of standards to be able to interpret political cartoons. And then it has some very small excerpts from Supreme Court opinions. And when we take excerpts out of larger documents for these inquiry packs, we try to really focus them and make them pretty small excerpts. So that it really focuses in on the issue. But I did want to mention that we, because we're doing all that focusing, we do suggest to teachers that if you, that they are all linked to in the end. So if you maybe had an advanced class and you wanted them to wade through more of the opinion, you didn't want to say to them, look, here's the important part. You wanted them to find the important part. We do link to all of the materials so that you would be able to do that as well. When up here, we link to our sources. So if a student thinks, if you have your students go to the website and they want to learn more about a particular issue, so they want to learn more about Shelby County, they can click on the link and it will take them to a source that goes into more depth. And then as far as landmark cases goes, let me see. Oh, there we go. Okay, so landmark cases, if you go to the landing page, it's going to show you all 15 cases. They're going to scroll through here, or you can use this to scroll. So if you want to learn more about, let's say, Gideon v. Wainwright, you can go to the web page. It's going to give you a little overview. And then it's going to ask you to choose whether you're a student or a teacher. And we have it as the default on the student view. It's going to give you options for reading about the case, a case summary based at a high school level or a middle school level. It's going to give you some background reading that's actually at 3 different levels, and some vocabulary skill building if that's important to you. Every case has a diagram of how the case went through the Supreme Court, so that students, if one of the things you're trying to teach is the court structure, they can see that this is how a case goes through the Supreme Court, goes to the Supreme Court. And then some excerpts from the decision and the opinions. But for each case also, there are lots of different learning activities. So here's an opinion analysis and a newspaper analysis, a classifying arguments activity. And if you go on the student view site, it's going to take you to the actual activity. If you go on the teacher view site, it's going to take you to a link. And the reasoning behind that is so that if we update it in our store as a teacher, you would get the latest version. So lots of different activities for students to do. And then the last thing that I want to show before I open for questions is, let's go to the teachers. If you go to the teacher site, there's also many other things. There are the strategies are written out in detail. There are planning guides if you have 1 day to teach this, if you have lots of days to teach this. but I thought this would also be a good opportunity to go to the store. So I mentioned a couple times, I probably let the word store slip. So all of our resources that I've talked about here are free and publicly available. And so when we say store, we often use air quotes because you're not going to be asked to purchase anything. It's just a way to disseminate the lessons in an easy way. So if you were interested in the high school case summary of Gideon v. Wainwright, you add it to your cart and then you have to check out, but you can see that it says the order subtotal is $0. You really will not be asked for any kind of payment information, and you won't be asked for any type of payment. And when you go to check out, if you already have an account set up, it's a really simple process that allows you to just make a couple clicks. You don't have any payment information because you're not buying anything, and you place your order. So it's really that simple. You can do it in just a few seconds, a few clicks, and then it's available immediately under this little go to downloads. You don't have to wait for an email to come to you or anything that gives you a link. So I'll take any questions, but otherwise I will put up the information about, how to keep in contact with us. So are there any questions? You can also feel free to drop them in the chat.
Can I get the address, the bit address again for the resources?
Yes, I would be happy to. I will just. Oh, okay. Ben was fast and already dropped it. So there is the bit.ly that will take you to all of the links.
Okay, he put it in the chat.
In the chat, yeah.
Okay, then one other question. Professional development that you all offer in the summer,
Yes.
when is that normally?
It is normally in mid to late June. So we really have to work around the court schedule. So if you're wondering why I'm hesitating a little bit, we have to work around the court schedule because except for during the COVID times, we generally are able to go to the court at least once, maybe more. So we have to work around their schedule. So their schedule is our schedule. And next year it's going to be a little complicated with Juneteenth. So the dates might be a little bit earlier next year because we're trying to avoid the Juneteenth holiday, which the justices take off, but also we don't want to ask participants to not celebrate Juneteenth. So I wish I had an easy answer to your question, but my real answer actually is a great lead in to the next two slides. I would be happy if you want to email me. So my email is cruffing@streetlaw.org, and I'm all over the website. You can't miss me. I'd be happy to, if you send me a thing that says I'm interested in when next year's Supreme Court Summer Institute is. So we already closed applications and have notified people for this year. But for next year, I'd be happy to tell you. And another great way to stay in touch with us is to join our educator email updates and newsletters, because that's where we disseminate all that information about when applications are opening, when they're due, what the dates of the Institute will be, and things like that. We also use this website to talk about new curriculum as it comes up. And we use it to talk about the SCOTUS in the classroom cases. When we release a new case, we also like to use that to be able to let people know this is now available. So if you're not already on our mailing list, it would be a great thing to do to keep in touch with all of that information. And obviously you can see all of our socials there too. You can also follow us on social media. We make those same types of announcements on social media as well. Well, I want to thank. Go ahead, Tanya.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's sad it's not more people here.
I know. And I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending, and I hope sincerely that you will celebrate Law Day in your classroom, and if you need any help finding resources, please, once again, I will toggle back. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'm happy to connect you with resources, connect you with the ABA, and do whatever I can do to help make the job that you do, that I know is very difficult, any easier. So thank you for all you do in your classrooms and all you do to promote the cornerstones of democracy, civics, civility, and collaboration. Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. You too, Tanya.